Okay, so I've been working on this build for a while. I don't know if anyone else has figured this out yet. I assume some people probably know about this. But yeah, it's possible to make a build that is literally immune to damage. And there's a few different ways to do it. So let's get started. Now, what I'm showing right now is option 1, which is with the effigy pendant. But you've got the indignant fetish option, which is more damage output for you, but it means you need to tank a hit every 20 seconds. I feel this is a better option overall, because that one hit you tank is going to be so minimal. You see, right now I actually have to worry about my grey health not running out, because if it does, the current amulet is going to turn off, and I'm just going to fucking die. Well, I'm not gonna, it's not that bad, but I'll start taking a bit of damage. Whereas with this, you know, it's just once every 20 seconds, so I feel a bit more controlled. And then with the Twisted Idol, you need to combine that with either more stacks of bulwark or with one of these bad boys right here to reach, you know, the immunity level. But it works as well, you know, so this is another good option. And the advantage with this option is that you can normal, you know, you can heavy roll instead of flopping, which is nice. So what I'm gonna do is, in a second here, when my health is, I feel, high enough, I'm gonna turn the amulet over to the one that I prefer, which is the damage-based one. I'll just do it now. So you see I took a hit, and now I'm immune again, and that's gonna last 20 seconds, and then I'll take another tiny little hit, and so on. So, you know, we can keep this going forever, literally. I could go to sleep with this on, and, well, I guess, you know, I would need to give myself a little bit of health regen to kind of compensate for the damage they're dealing. But yeah, you know, I could go to sleep. So I'm gonna get rid of these guys because it's probably annoying to listen to them, and then I'll explain the build. You'll notice as well, while we're immune to damage, we're immune to stagger, and that's because I guess stagger happens if you take damage, and since they're not damaging us even though they're hitting us, it doesn't count. Okay, we get an elite. That always happens when you kill enough enemies. I need to get hit here to get my buff back. And I'm glad that he spawned because I wanted to show you that even an elite, you know, isn't gonna do significant damage. It's not like that one hit is the difference between life and death. It really isn't. And in terms of, you know, small heals, you can just use a bird pellet. So, you know, there we go. I went a little bit over there, but that's okay. You know, I'll just, when I take my next hit to proc the amulet, it'll also get me back to where my rings are all in effect. So let's look at the rings and the amulet. So we talked about the 3 amulets, now the rings. There are 4 rings that I recommend, and then there are 3 rings you can use instead of some of these options, and then there's 1 ring here that I just thought was interesting. So the first ring is Restriction Cord, and the kind of simple effect here is that it reduces incoming damage by 10%, but the more interesting effect is that it reduces our health by 50%. Now this means that you could technically combine the whole build with something that heals as well, like Lifesteal if you wanted, but you would be losing the Amber Moonstone, which I feel is a crucial part of the build. But if you wanted to tweak it, this ring would allow you to do that without losing too much damage mitigation. But thanks to this, Hardened Coil is always going to be fully procced, giving us 15% reduction. And Rusted Heirloom is always going to be on, giving us 2 stacks of Bulwark, which is another 11%. And then we want to reach a health pool below 30%, and that will give us another 25% damage mitigation, which also has the added effect of making us immune to temporary effects. So that's really, really nice. And yeah, all of this combined gets us to a very juicy, right now this ring isn't on, but it gets us to a pretty spicy amount of total damage reduction. Then some of these rings you might not have. So if you don't have the rusted heirloom, you can replace it with the Fey Bruiser ring. Now that's going to be less consistent because it only lasts 7 seconds and you need to deal melee damage. Now you can deal melee damage from range using either the Huntress Spear or the Krell Axe. And I'm not sure, but maybe Overloaded procs the ring. So, it says 410 seconds. So maybe with this you could make it last 17 seconds, I don't know. But that's really, I think, your two options. Technically, you could use World's Edge, I think, to deal range damage, and you could also probably use Atom Splitter as well to do it. So you've got a few options there. Maybe there's others I don't know about. What else do we have? So you could replace, and I'm talking about this one because you don't want to stack two Bulwark rings together because Bulwark is a buff with diminishing returns and it has a cap of 5 stacks. And with this build, we're already hitting 5 stacks. So yeah, you really only want one of these if possible. Now, hardcore metal bands is another option to replace rusted heirloom. And this gives you up to 5 stacks of bulwark by itself, but the stacks last 10 seconds and they cannot be refreshed. They can only wear off. So if you have 5 stacks that all triggered at the same time, and you continue to take damage, it's not going to refresh any of those stacks, and they're all going to go away together as well, which will open you up for, whatever damage that exposes you to in terms of damage reduction. So this is not a very consistent option, but it is, functional-ish. And finally, you have Soul Guard, which, if you wanted to replace Challenger with Summoner, could work. But then you would need your summons to stay alive, and so I don't know how likely that is to happen. So that's that. Now, I said I had an interesting ring on top of these, which is this one here. I really like this ring, and in a game like, Elden Ring, Dark Souls, you would be able to make this ring work for yourself. You could debuff yourself with, whatever, weapon arts, with bombs and so on, but in this game you can't. So if someone figured out a way to do that, and I mean I have, right? This used to be able to cause yourself a debuff and so did this, but they seem to have been patched out or something. And they weren't permanent anyway. What you would really want is like Cursed to be on all the time, because that is just a little bit less health and we're immune anyway. But this is potentially 20% damage mitigation, so I really like this, but it doesn't really work right now. In terms of armor, Leto Mark II. Now, you might say, yeah, but Mark 1 is heavier, and yeah, okay. But the weight is just a consequence of the build, right? The goal here is just the armor. The weight is actually a negative. We'd rather have light armor if possible. But this is the armor that gives us the correct amount of damage mitigation. So this is what we pick. And then for our archetypes, the only mandatory one is the engineer. And the reason for that is magnetic field. So that gives you 15% damage reduction. And so that is kind of the last piece of the puzzle, right? That is what makes us invulnerable. And that's why I'm always carrying my turret around. Doesn't matter which one you pick though, I just like this one. And then I like the Challenger because since we have limited ammo, I like to just hit enemies in melee. And we get a 35% damage buff from Challenger, Plus, we get more opportunities for bulwark, which means if maybe our turret was on cooldown, we can use this class to compensate until it's off cooldown again, right? So this gives us a little bit more flexibility and a bit more opportunity to improvise when things get spicy. Something else that adds to that is the confidence booster. So that's that's pretty good. Obviously 10%, that's just another way for us to reach the immunity cap. And then bark extract is also required for the armor to be high enough. In terms of traits, strong back, kind of useless, but I don't have a choice because we're getting it from Challenger. Fortify, that's really good, that's required, and the build will not work without that. Potency is really nice because we are using concoctions and other consumables, the confidence booster, so the extra duration is good. Vigor, whatever. This is more helpful if you're using the other amulets, the effigy pendant. But I prefer the extra damage from Indignant and just tanking a hit every 20 seconds. What was I looking at? Traits. Expertise, why not? I guess, whatever. Bark Skin is another one that is required. The build won't work without this. Recovery, why not? Glutton, since we're using consumables mid-fight as part of the build, this isn't required, but it definitely helps. And then a bit of extra endurance because again, why not? But you could really pick anything where I didn't specifically say is required. You can just pick whatever you want instead. What you cannot pick is stuff that is giving you health back. So lifesteal is off the table, regen is off the table. If you pick those, what's going to happen is you're going to heal outside of the range of the Amber Moonstone, and you're going to make yourself vulnerable to damage. And if you do that, especially if you don't have this ring on, which means you could heal out of range of all of your damage reductions, you could die in one shot to some bosses, right? Like Phelan, for example, has a one-shot attack at max health with 80% damage mitigation plus. So you do not want to heal over, especially not over 50%. That would be really bad. Over this, maybe. Still dangerous in a boss fight, but outside of a boss fight, why not? Who cares? But in a boss fight, be careful. And yeah, that's really it. In terms of the relic fragments, you want armor and damage reduction, and then for the third one, relic use like consumable use speed is good, or like buff duration is good, or you could just go for damage if that's what you wanted as well. That's kind of up to you for the last one. I left it empty here. And again, I think this is the best version of this build. But Challenger is not mandatory, you could replace that. Weapons don't matter, pick whatever you want. I don't know if I said that already. And yeah, that's it. It is what it is, right? You are literally invulnerable, and depending on which amulet you use, you're either invulnerable 99% of the time or 100% of the time, right? And so that's up to you. I prefer this build with more damage and like 99% immunity. And the truth is, I can just use confidence booster and be invulnerable all the time, and I could just not use an amulet at all, right? I could just pick any amulet I wanted and rely entirely on the confidence booster. But I don't like having to look at my buffs and worry that it's going to run out. I'd rather just have an amulet there that does it for me. It makes things easier. Now, everything I've described so far is required, and so the rest of the video is going to be talking about what do you do if you're missing just one or two of these items. How can you compensate for that and still be immune and like have a bit of fun with this? So option one is you've got obviously the confidence booster, right? That's gonna help a lot. Option two is if you can't be immune to damage, if that's off the table, then lifesteal and regen are going to be your next best bet. So any slot where you can't get damage immunity, you're going to want to replace it with some form of consistent healing. Now, lifesteal isn't as consistent as regen, but regen isn't as much health per second as lifesteal. So that's up to you to decide. And again, as soon as you start to play, into a healing build rather than a damage mitigation build, you do open yourself to one-shots. So, keep that in mind. But that aside, on the challenger, you grab Juggernaut and you combine that with, where is it? No. Which one is it? No. This one, the Diverting Heart. And so you can get really fast cooldowns with that. And then if one of these rings is missing and you don't have any of the other replacements here, you can pick, not that, this ring here, the Sapphire Dreamstone, to further reduce your cooldowns. Combine that with a weapon that has a high rate of fire, like this MP60 or the Tech 22, or this or Enigma, or anything with a high rate of fire. In this slot there are plenty that have high rates of fire. The Bone Saw is probably your best bet though, just because it has a shitload of ammo. And every time you get a crit, you're going to reduce your cooldowns. That's going to give you good uptime on the extra 3 bulwark stacks from this. And then also, when you use a relic with Challenger, if there are enemies near you, you'll get 2 stacks of bulwark. So you have a lot of options to reach the damage mitigation cap, and you can easily even exceed it. It's just not going to have 100% uptime. So you can still make it work, and you can still get really close, but you won't be immune. And again, to be immune, you need to be at like 171% damage reduction or more, something like that. And yeah, I don't think there's too much to add here. I guess I feel like I'm trying to answer any questions people might have, and I think that's probably a bad idea. If you do have questions, just leave a comment, and I'm happy to, reply. If you want to know where to find these items, just look at the Fextra Life wiki. The Twisted Idol is from Cass. I know that because I spent probably 5 hours trying to get it, and then I gave up and I just downloaded a save file from a website, which had all of the items already unlocked. This was, ironically, the build I enjoyed the most is a build that I have all of the items for on my character already. So yeah, that's it, and hopefully you enjoy. Thanks.